Hello and welcome to another episode of The Joy of Basing. Today we will be painting the bloodboard pitch base that we have been building in the last video. The grass mat that we have used is has already quite some color to it, so we don't need to paint it green, but it is very important to really work out these little details that you see in the grass. If you look at the reference, there are so many different little things on the grass that are more than just the grass. There are little flowers growing there, little bugs flying around. A base like that, it's really good to emphasize all of the little things that you can find on a grassy turf like that. We will also paint the wooden structures that we have built. Here we will try two different things. One is to create a look of a fence that has been repaired quite often, so the shades of the wood differentiate a little bit. And the second board is the scoreboard, or like the advertising board. So here you will see a more homogeneous type of wood, which is rather soft wood, which has been weathered by the sun and by the weather quite extremely. So there will be no clean edges, everything will be a little bit worn down, and there will be a lot of green and moss on it. All of these things that would occur if you have a look at the real life infield reference of these objects.
Okay, let's go straight to painting. I use a lot of colors from P3. So here you can see how I paint some bootstrap leather in a heavy base consistency onto the mid plank. I've mixed in some Nordic olive because a little green will always help to make the wood look a little bit more realistic and natural. Then I change to some Adrian flesh. Again, it's a heavy base consistency, and I just apply it onto the whole plank. Now for the last board, I use some sanguine base, again in the heavy base consistency, and I mix in a little bit black to the mix. But in this case, I really want the board to look different, so yeah, I use some black to darken it down a little bit. Here I use some Manoff white base to lighten the color tone up a little bit, and we apply that in the heavy layer, or like medium layer consistency. Notice how I hold the brush. It's very important to ground yourself, so to say, to the piece that you are about to apply the wood grain on. My fingers touch the base, the wooden base where the plank is attached to, and I really try to make these little streaks that you can see here on my finger. The brush tip is actually not very sharp. It's not a new brush. It's very good to use a brush that has a little bit like a split tip for applying the first layers of grain. With every step that we do, we will get more fine and fine, so it's actually good to have a split tip, so you have a couple of strands of grain that are painted at the same time, so to say. Wood grain is really similar to human hair. If you look at the blonde hair color, for example, it's not just one color. It's a mixture of different colors, of different brown tones. The mixture of the colors is what makes the tone natural and gives it some depth. So this is exactly what we try to do here. We apply a lot of different streaks of paint. Although a single streak looks quite thick, we will later go into this with the shadow color, and this will help to split the thick strains up a little bit. That way we don't have to paint very fine or very precise. We will allow the paint to do the work for us, so to say. Yeah, so here for the next highlight I have used a little bit of Manoff white highlight to even increase the light for the grain. I try to stay on the top part of the board and apply like a zenithal light that comes from above, but I don't overdo it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a general light situation. Okay, so also for other colors, for sanguine base, I use a little bit of the Manoff white highlight to further increase the light. I try to paint streaks that are a little bit more fine than the ones that came earlier. So step by step I can build up the light by just adding more and more of the wood grain. The good thing is also, since I use the same highlight tone, you see that it doesn't make such a big difference. The colors are more unified. Now I use some armor brown, and then I darken down the bootstrap leather with a little bit of black and a tiny little bit of armor brown to give it a reddish tone. And this we will apply in a heavy glaze or like medium glaze consistency. That surface that we've created before the highlight will now be broken up by the shadow tone with wood grain, with these lines that I paint on. At this stage you can also switch onto a brush that has a sharp tip, so a new brush. I'm using a Winsor Newton Series 1, the regular size. It's good to use the regular size because the bristles are long, and therefore the color will flow a little bit better out of the brush onto the planks. Okay, here also the same shadow tone for the Adrian Flash plank. Same thing as before, just a little bit black and a tiny little bit of armor brown. It was called tank brown earlier, but Vallejo has changed the name, so it's a little bit confusing for me sometimes, but it's the same tone. Here you can see how I erase a little mistake that I made with using my patented gypsy brush. The gypsy brush is very useful for little mistakes that you make when you paint something. It's basically an old Winsor Newton brush that where the tip has separated entirely. So I cut off the tip and then I use it as a eraser brush, but I also apply some techniques that we will be able to see in other videos that are yet to come. The consistency of the paint is quite thin, therefore I can really tint the wood without painting too much of new lines into the whole thing. I also try to apply that from the lower part. Maybe you've noticed that I flipped the board, so we apply the highlight from the top and the shadow from the bottom. Okay, here I mix some Manoff white highlight into the mix, and we want a medium to heavy layer consistency. I have flipped the board once again because now we are painting highlights again, and this brush here, it has to have a finer tip. So yeah, you can really paint more fine. I'm not using a finer size brush like a size 0 or size 00 because I really need a lot of paint in the reservoir of the brush to flow into the tip. A smaller brush would result in less color that is kept in the brush, and therefore the really important thing is the tip and the heavy body in the bristles. And this motion, this dragging motion or dabbing or like stroke motion is very important. It's something you can learn and practice, not on the piece itself, but on somewhere else. You can work really fine with that with some practice, and yeah, apply both highlights and shadows. It's a very, very useful tip. Also, again, notice how I connected myself to the base with the finger. In theory, I touch the very ground with my finger because my finger is connected to my thumb. The thumb is connected to my hand. The hand is connected to the table. The table is connected to the floor. So I can minimize the shake if there is any. So now a little bit of Moro white, yeah, even further highlight. We're getting really fine here. Notice how the area that I highlight is also becoming very, very small. So only like the very top of the board where the light would hit. That being said, it's important not to forget about these little cracks that we have chipped in with the rusty pliers. They will get some light also. Since we use the same highlight, the base tone that was quite extreme in the beginning is only shining through on some spots, which is ideal because it gives the whole piece a little bit like a more balanced tone. See here, I also glaze in some of the mid-tone once again over the highlights, so it doesn't look so chalky, and yeah, get some of the saturation back. You can really come up with very interesting grain patterns. Wood is very interesting. Depending on where you harvest it from, it can have a lot of very interesting swirls and all kinds of really, really interesting grain types. Again, I recommend consulting a reference book about wood types. That way you will be able to play with color tones, and wood is really, really diverse. So you can find nearly anything you can think of. Brown tones and purples and all these things. Now I use some Vallejo dark yellow from the Model Wash series, and we apply glazes from the dark yellow and the dark brown. These two tones are very, very nice because you can very quickly add some saturation or like some additional color by glazing them in. You have seen the consistency, it's like a medium glaze. And you see I put it in below there on the plank, then I clean the brush and just use water to allow the color to flow into the upper part. I never paint into the highlight because that would just look wrong. Yeah, I put it down there, and then again, like clean brush, Don't lick the brush because the color can be quite harmful to your health. You can quickly use some water and then use a paper towel to get rid of the excess moisture in your brush. Alright, you see a nice satin shine with the green and the brown, really nice. You can do this step again if you want to increase the shine, or like here, if you want to add some like depth or like moisture to certain parts that are still connected to the ground. After this step, it's important to increase the highlight once again. Do it very, very carefully and only from the top of the planks. This is also the step where I use the Schminke Academy Acrylic Color Titanium White. It's a very, very thick pastos acrylic color that helps to build the absolute last and final highlight. You can also use the gypsy brush if you go overboard and just erase some of the mistakes that you might have done. And also you can add some of the dark yellow model wash to add additional tones. Now I use some Japanese uniform from watercolor for the more clean version of the base. I mix it with the bootstrap leather tone in a thick, like heavy base consistency. So we just cover the whole thing up in one color, and I will show you how you can then bring some variation into these planks without applying different colors on each and every single one of them. That will create a like more unified look. It's also good to have a hair blower nearby. That way you will be able to clean that first layer up really quickly, and the color needs to be dry before you apply the highlight. So this is the base tone again, mixed with some Man white base. Just as you saw earlier, it's applying the wooden grain in these streaks, these line motion. Connect yourself to the base well, and then just start with the paint flow. You don't have to be very precise at this point. Just bring in some brighter tone there. Leave some of the paint that was there earlier. Let it shine through. And yeah, you will end up with something like that. Yeah, for the back view, at this point we can keep the light in mind. So we know that the light is coming from the top, so we can ignore the very lower part a little bit. But now you can also see what the chipping of the board has done to like structure wise. We have all these little pockets that will now catch the light really nicely, so the board will look really more interesting than a flat standard board. Yeah, when you go lower, you can also add a little bit more to base tone. So the board starts to be highlighted already on a global level. So you can see it here a little bit that the top planks are a bit lighter than the bottom planks. And yeah, you can achieve that by just simply using a little bit more of the base tone in the lower parts than in the upper parts. Okay, here we have mixed a nice shadow tone by adding a little bit black and some bootstrap leather into the mix. We have flipped the board around because we are now painting shadow tone, and we apply that in a light base or heavy layer consistency from the lower part of each individual plank. Heavy layer consistency. I've also switched to the miniature series brush. You cannot see it here properly in the label because I forgot to put it, but it's actually a short bristle brush. That way I will have more control over where the grain is going, and it will look a little bit different than as if we had applied these lines with a regular series 7 brush. Yeah, and then it's a back and forth. It's applying a highlight and then applying shadow and then a highlight again. Okay, here we are glazing some armor brown in a light glaze consistency or medium glaze consistency. And then we clean the brush, and again we use water to use just a tiny little bit of the color to flow naturally to the top. This board I want to have it a little bit darker, although this is all the same wood. I kind of like that if you have a little bit more contrast on one board. Maybe it's a special snowflake kind of board. Has more weathering than the others for some reason, or maybe it's tilted in an angle that it catches more of the rain, so it looks a little bit different. It helps to make it a little bit more exciting than only the same board. Here we use the dark yellow again from the Vallejo model wash. It is called dark yellow, but it looks very green also, and if you mix it a little bit with the dark brown, it has this really nice natural look that also reminds me a little bit of moss, or what happens with mossy surfaces. Really ideal for wood. Okay, we have let this dry. Now we mix a little bit of the Morrow white into the base tone, and we start to apply the sharp highlight on the top of the scoreboard. We use these chipping edges for a nice light situation, and these little cracks that you see, we can also highlight them so they will catch the light from below, not from above, because they are like imperfections in the wood, and the light would gather. It looks better if the light collects on the lower bottom of the crack. And here the super fine, very careful highlight on the very top of these edges of these chips. Often people make the mistake that they dilute the color at this step too much. As you can see, the color is still at a medium layer, maybe consistency. It's not very thin. Therefore it covers, and that's a good thing for the wood grain. If it was too transparent, it would just not look good, very blurry. Here we switch the brush again to a miniature series size 1, sorry. With this we apply the very, very final highlights. It's the lines though, so, and we have not used the Schminke titanium white, which we can do like see here, in not like lines, but rather in dots. And here you can see how I use the side of the brush, not the tip. If you have a easily accessible edge, you can use the side of the brush, and that will make your life more easy, because the lines will get straighter than if you use the tip. Alright, that's it. We will have a look at how this whole thing looks in the base. Really cool. Now we switch back to the board. I painted the back side of cam. It's the same thing as you saw with the front. Yeah, also looks really nice from the tone. Now I have some pig iron from P3 that I use to cover these little nails, and I will use some mithril silver from Games Workshop for the highlights. It's a color that's not available anymore, but actually I just use it because I don't want to throw the pot away. You can use, for example, chrome from Vallejo color. Just a very high silver is just good. And here just a tiny little reflex point on the top of these little nails will do the trick. Okay, this looks good. Now we will have to give some more definition to the grass. The grass already looks quite good, but it's really nice to see all these little grass things to pop up. So we need some jack bone and some Man of White highlight, and we will dry brush these onto the very tip of the bristles of the grass. I think they're called differently, not bristles, but yeah. Okay, you see I do it very gently. I only want to have color on the very ends of the grass and not all over the place. Don't worry about grass falling off your base at this point. What will not stick to your base will fall out anyways sooner or later. So here I use even a brighter white. It's the Morrow white, and I applied with a Series 7 size 2 brush because it holds more color. Not the dry brush. It's a little bit like just a highlight, and I applied in a medium layered consistency. Yeah, now if you compare it, you can really see that the grass looks a little bit more sun-worn, and that is what we were trying to do. Has more definition, looks a little bit like HD that makes sense. So together with the pitch fence, it looks really, really nice. Okay, in order to apply little numbers and actually the score onto the scoreboard, I decided to try some of the Blood Bowl transfer sheets that come with the starter box from Blood Bowl. You can also print your own water transfer sheets, but it's a little bit more sophisticated. So why not just use the ones that come with the box? I soak them in water and then I use a brush to get them off the paper and just put them right where I want them to be. There are also different mediums that help you to solve the plastic or like the paper, the transfer paper, but I don't need it. At this point they are very small. Here I have prepared little paper or little textile from this copper sheet. It's very, very thin, a fraction of a millimeter. We use a hand drill to drill in little holes where we will put nails into. It is really a little bit crazy, the amount of detail that we are applying here, but you know, these little labels, they have to stick to the board somehow, so nailing them seems like a very quick solution and something that would be done in reality too. So yeah, why not do it like that? So here we have primed them with some white and we use some armor brown in a light glaze consistency to add something like a paper texture or like a little shade to them. I apply the color and then I clean the brush and then I paint something like a shadow in these little folds. It's hard to see because it's very, you know, we use very bright lights to film this and therefore white comes out overexposed, but yeah, you will see it when you take a look. When I tilt it around, you can see what I've painted. Less is really more, so sometimes the color that is still in your brush is enough to make a little shade. Here we're using the loaded brush technique. For this we load the body of the brush with the color, then we take a little bit of the titanium white, of the pastels white onto the tip, and then we mix the two colors, we blend them on the surface, and as the white is like connects to the surface, the color that is in the back of the brush floats to the front and yeah, creates this blending right on the surface. Again, it's a little bit hard to see. There will be more videos coming with where this technique is explained a little bit more precise. Here we are applying the lettering onto the labels. I want to make them appear as if someone has drawn them on by hand, so it is okay that they look a little bit clumsy. You know, maybe some halfling has taken a letter and a brush and has just applied these letters there. It's very wise to know exactly what word you want to write on the label before you do that, and then to start with the first and the last letter. Therefore you will make it less likely that you will run out of space. So here we have the word home, so the H is the first one, the E the last, and then we paint the two letters in between that. It's very useful because it's very, very hard to estimate how much space these letters will take. You could, in theory, sketch them in with a pencil and then draw them over with your paint, but this method here is quite quick and I think quite practical. Home sweet home. There it is. So that's the home team label, and here I do the away team label for the team that comes and visits. And as our sign is cut on the base, I don't have to write in the Y of away because it is already the end of the sign. Okay, so the score is 3-1 for our team. Hooray, we're winning. Yeah, this is how it looks. You can also correct little mistakes with the base tone, but it tends to look a little bit artificial, so yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. I also painted the turn earlier and I kind of liked it with some regular paint, so it looks more like a sign that has been improvised. Alright, and we see here that the miniature really looks good on the base, with also the little ball. It's very important to apply some satin varnish at the very end of when you put on these wet transfer labels on, because they have a shine to them. The foil that holds them has a shine, and we can eliminate the shine with some varnish really quickly.